The first thing the human ship did was refuse to answer a question it had not been asked. The array at the listening edge of the confluence picked up the object as a discontinuity in expectation, a mass that moved as if it understood motion differently. It did not flare its drives when it crossed the lattice of detection beams, did not broadcast courtesy pings, did not even align its approach to the polite geometries established by 100 species who had learned, through error and loss, how not to frighten one another. It simply arrived, a long shape that bent space with a gentle stubbornness, and continued inward at a speed that was neither aggressive nor cautious. It was deliberate. The confluence watchers assembled a preliminary consensus in less than a heartbeat, as they always did when confronted with something new. Unknown vessel. No transponder signature matching archived civilizations. Hull composition inconsistent with known manufacturing cultures. Power profile high but distributed. No obvious weapons ports but numerous structural anomalies. Intent indeterminate. It was the last line that troubled them. The confluence was old, older than most of its members could comfortably conceptualize. It had begun as a simple agreement between 3 species who had realized that killing one another over misinterpreted signals was inefficient. Over time, it had become a web of shared assumptions, codified rules, and reflexive expectations. Ships announced themselves. Ships declared purpose. Ships accepted guidance into controlled volumes of space. When ships failed to do these things, the confluence prepared defenses, not out of malice but habit. The human ship did none of what was expected, and yet it did not do what was feared. When the confluence sent a general hail across all known communication bands, including mathematical greeting constructs and symbolic resonance patterns designed to evoke curiosity rather than threat, the ship did not respond. It did not change course either. It continued inward, passing the first ring of habitats where species with radial symmetry grew their children in light wells, passing the shipyards where kilometer-long skeletons of future vessels glimmered like the bones of patient animals. Only when it reached the buffer zone around the central assembly did it do something unexpected. It slowed. The deceleration was precise to a degree that made several analysis clusters pause their internal chatter. No drive flare, no reaction mass plume, no distortion spike. The ship simply shed velocity as if it had been holding speed in reserve and decided it was time to let go. Then, and only then, it spoke. The signal was narrow, focused, and quiet. It did not flood the spectrum or demand attention. It was directed specifically at the confluence relay nodes, encoded in a layered structure that suggested the sender understood that its message would be dismantled, examined, and reassembled by many kinds of minds. The opening was simple. We acknowledge your presence. We have arrived to speak. The confluence reeled, not because of the words, but because of the framing. The human ship had not responded to a hail. It had issued a statement. It had not asked permission. It had acknowledged presence, as if the confluence itself were the object of arrival rather than the destination. Questions erupted across the consensus, colliding and fusing. How did the ship know where to send the signal? How did it encode a message that could be parsed without prior linguistic exchange? Why wait until now? The reply, when it came, was cautious and layered with deference protocols that had been refined over centuries. You have entered a shared volume of space governed by mutual accord. Identify yourselves and state your purpose. There was a pause, long enough to register as intentional. We are human, the signal returned. Our purpose is to measure what we can build together. That sentence propagated through the confluence like a stone dropped into a still pool, sending ripples of interpretation. Measure could mean assess. Measure could mean compare. Measure could mean limit. Build together implied cooperation, but it also implied capacity. It assumed equality that had not been granted. The confluence did not object immediately. Instead, It did what it always did when confronted with novelty that did not immediately threaten destruction. It convened. Delegates assembled in the central exchange, a vast construct where matter and energy were shaped into forms that could be perceived by minds that required geometry, by minds that required vibration, by minds that required narrative. The exchange was not a place so much as an agreement to overlap perceptions long enough to decide something important. Representatives manifested according to their nature. The Keth unfolded into branching crystalline lattices that chimed softly as they adjusted to local gravity conventions. The Sorial emerged as a cloud of motes, each carrying a fragment of shared awareness. The Thren choir resonated into being as a complex interference pattern that translated sound into thought. And there at the periphery, something new appeared. It was not the human ship. It was too early for that. Instead, a probe detached from the vessel and drifted into the exchange volume, shedding layers until it resolved into a shape that could be perceived by most delegates without specialized translation. It was humanoid, but not in the way the confluence would later come to understand that term. It had bilateral symmetry, 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso, and a head, but these features were simplified, almost schematic. Its surface was matte and unreflective, a neutral gray that did not privilege any wavelength. Its face was smooth, with only the suggestion of features. "I am an interface," it said, its voice modulated to be audible but not intrusive. "I am here to facilitate understanding." The confluence reacted with a mix of fascination and alarm. Embodied representatives were rare and often symbolic. To send one uninvited into the exchange was a breach of etiquette bordering on aggression. "You have not been invited to this forum," the Thren choir resonated, their combined voices weaving a complex chord of warning. "I understand," the interface replied. "We have observed that invitations are often extended only after misunderstandings occur. We are attempting to reduce the probability of that outcome." That statement triggered a cascade of probability assessments. It suggested long-range observation, data collection, and a degree of predictive modeling that rivaled the confluence's own capabilities. It also suggested confidence. "Withdraw your construct," the Keth chimed, their crystalline facets flashing with controlled irritation. "We will determine whether and how to engage." The interface inclined its head, a gesture that would later be recognized as a sign of respect. "I will remain at the boundary of your exchange," it said. "I will not intrude further unless addressed. We consider it important that you know we are willing to be present." With that, it retreated, dissolving into a cloud of particles that hovered just beyond the consensus boundary, visible but non-interactive. The confluence resumed deliberation, though the rhythm had changed. Where once there had been curiosity layered over caution, there was now an undercurrent of unease. "They have been watching us," a Sorial cluster pulsed. "For how long?" "Long enough to model our protocols," the Keth replied. "Long enough to anticipate our response. That alone is not hostile," the Thren choir countered. "We observe newcomers as well." "Yes," the Keth chimed, "but we do not announce that observation as if it were a courtesy." The debate spiraled, touching on past encounters that had gone poorly, on civilizations that had arrived with gifts and left with control, on those that had been underestimated and had burned entire sectors in retaliation. Through it all, one fact remained stubbornly central. The human ship had not asked for anything. Eventually, a consensus formed, not unanimous but sufficient. The confluence would engage, but on controlled terms. A response was sent. "You will be permitted to send a limited delegation into the exchange. You will adhere to established protocols. Any deviation will be considered a breach of accord." The reply came almost immediately. "Agreed," the human ship signaled. "We will send one." This time, when the presence manifested, it was different. The human delegate was not a projection or a construct. It was biological or close enough that the confluence instruments classified it as such. It wore no obvious armor, carried no visible weapons. Its body was marked with scars, some old and faded, others newer, telling a story of survival in an environment that did not coddle its inhabitants. Its face was expressive, lines etched by time and emotion. Its eyes moved constantly, taking in the exchange with a mixture of awe and calculation. When it spoke, it did so slowly, as if choosing each word with care. "My name is Marrow Quill," it said. "I am here because my people believe that if we do not speak now, we will speak later under worse conditions." The confluence absorbed this. Names were significant. To offer one was to offer identity, but also vulnerability. "You have come far without introduction," the Thren choir resonated. "Why now?" Marrow Quill took a breath, a simple biological act that nonetheless drew attention. "Because we learned something," Quill said. "We learned that the universe does not reward waiting for permission." That statement landed heavily. It was not a threat, it was not a boast, it was a lesson delivered without embellishment. "We were not the first to look up at the dark and wonder who else was there," Quill continued. "We were not the strongest when we first left our world. We were not the most advanced. We were curious, and we were stubborn, and we were very good with our hands." The Keth chimed softly, intrigued despite themselves. "Hands," they echoed. "You measure your worth in manipulators." Quill smiled, a brief expression that conveyed warmth and something sharper. "We measure our worth in what our hands can make when our backs are against the wall," Quill replied. "We build tools, we build shelters, we build bridges between ideas that do not want to touch. And when we encounter something larger than us, we do not ask how to destroy it first. We ask how to use it without breaking ourselves." The confluence felt a shift, subtle but undeniable. This was not the language of conquerors nor of supplicants. It was the language of builders. "And if we refuse," the Sorial pulsed, "if we decide that your presence is an unacceptable risk." Quill did not hesitate. "Then we will leave," Quill said. "We will mark this region as occupied by minds that prefer distance, and we will go elsewhere. Space is large, time is larger. We are patient when patience serves a purpose." There it was again, confidence not in dominance but in endurance. The confluence considered this, weighing the cost of engagement against the cost of ignorance. They saw a species that had arrived uninvited but not unannounced, that had observed but not interfered, that had spoken plainly where others had cloaked intent in ritual. "What do you want to build?" the Thren choir asked. Quill looked out across the exchange, at forms and patterns that represented ways of being humans had never imagined until they encountered them. "Understanding," Quill said. "Agreements that do not rely on fear, systems that fail without collapsing everything around them. We have made many mistakes on our way here. We assume we will make more. We would prefer to make them with others who are willing to point out the cracks before they become faults." The confluence was silent, in the way that only a collective mind could be, all processing focused inward. At last, a response emerged, tentative but real. "You will be granted provisional observer status," the confluence declared. "You will share limited data. You will accept oversight. This is not trust." Quill inclined their head. "It is a start," Quill said. "We are very good at starts." As the exchange began to dissolve, protocols shifting to accommodate this new variable, the human ship adjusted its orbit, settling into a pattern that suggested it intended to stay longer than a visit, but shorter than a conquest. Within its hull, systems recalibrated, models updated, hands moved over interfaces, both physical and conceptual. Humanity had arrived not with a roar or a plea, but with a statement of presence and a willingness to be measured. And somewhere deep within the confluence's vast, ancient awareness, a question formed that none had expected to ask. What happens when a species that builds its way out of trouble decides to build its way into the wider universe? Observation, the confluence quickly learned, was not a passive state for humans. It was an activity, almost an industry, pursued with an intensity that bordered on reverence. Within the first rotation after provisional status was granted, human sensor arrays began sharing data streams that were meticulously annotated, cross-referenced, and most unsettling of all, openly incomplete. Where other species tended to present conclusions, humans presented process. They showed their work. The Confluence Oversight Clusters monitored this with a mix of appreciation and discomfort. The humans did not simply transmit raw measurements of stellar flux or gravitic shear. They transmitted commentary. They included margins of error, alternative interpretations, and notes that admitted ignorance without apology. In one particularly dense packet, a human analyst had appended a message that translated roughly to, "This pattern might mean something profound or absolutely nothing. We are leaning toward nothing, but we want you to see it anyway." Such transparency was rare. Most civilizations, when dealing with a supranational entity like the Confluence, curated their contributions carefully, fearing that too much openness would reveal weakness. Humans seem to operate under a different assumption. Weakness, if acknowledged early, could be reinforced. Ignored, it became catastrophic. Marrow-Quill remained the primary point of contact, though it became increasingly clear that Quill was not a leader in the hierarchical sense the Confluence expected. Decisions came from elsewhere, sometimes after delays that suggested debate rather than command. When asked directly about this, Quill had laughed, a short bark of sound that startled several delegates. "We argue," Quill said, "constantly about everything. It is how we make sure the loudest voice is not the only one." This admission rippled through the Confluence with unexpected force. Many member species had long histories of centralized authority, whether embodied in councils, queens, or distributed consensus matrices. The idea that internal conflict could be harnessed as a strength rather than a destabilizing factor was not new, but humans seemed to have institutionalized it to a degree that was unsettling. As data exchange continued, Confluence analysts began to map the human technological profile. It was, in many ways, unremarkable. Their propulsion systems were efficient, but not revolutionary. Their energy generation relied on well-understood principles, scaled and optimized rather than transcended. Their materials science showed ingenuity, particularly in composite structures that balanced resilience with repairability, but nothing that violated known constraints. What stood out was integration. Human systems were layered with redundancy, not just in hardware, but in function. If one method failed, another could take over, sometimes in ways that seemed improvised rather than designed. Software architectures showed evidence of having been patched, reworked, and occasionally rewritten entirely in response to unforeseen conditions. There was an evolutionary quality to it, as if their technology bore the scars of survival. This impression deepened when the Confluence permitted limited physical inspection of the human vessel. A delegation of observers, encapsulated in translation fields, moved through corridors that were clearly designed for beings with a specific range of proportions, but had been modified over time. Handholds were worn smooth. Panels bore markings that indicated repeated access. Some sections showed evidence of rapid repair, plates welded over damage that had not been fully erased. "This ship has been hurt," a Keth observer chimed, crystalline facets resonating with concern. Repeatedly, Quill nodded, walking alongside the delegation. "Yes," Quill said, "it keeps going anyway." There was no pride in the statement, no boast. It was a fact offered plainly. The Confluence had seen warships before, vessels built to project power and intimidate. The human ship was different. It was a working machine, a tool meant to endure. Its weapons systems, when identified, were defensive in orientation, optimized for interception and area denial rather than annihilation. Even its offensive capabilities, limited as they were, emphasized precision over spectacle. "Why not build more?" the Sauriel asked, their motes clustering inquisitively. "You have the industrial capacity, you could field fleets." Quill considered this before answering. "We could," Quill said. "We have, it did not end well." The Confluence noted the past tense. "Conflict," the Thren choir resonated. "Internal or external?" "Both," Quill replied. We learned that when you build too many tools for breaking things, you start looking for reasons to use them. We are trying something else. Something else, it turned out, involved infrastructure. Within cycles, human proposals began arriving, not as demands, but as offers. They suggested shared relay stations at the periphery of confluence space, designed to enhance communication fidelity between species with incompatible sensory modalities. They proposed modular habitats that could be adapted to multiple biochemistries, intended not as permanent settlements, but as neutral meeting grounds. They outlined frameworks for conflict de-escalation that relied on third-party verification rather than trust. Each proposal came with simulations, failure analyses, and explicit invitations for critique. Humans seemed to expect their ideas to be challenged and appeared energized when flaws were identified. "This is inefficient," a Keth delegate chimed during one review. "You have allowed for too many contingencies. The resource cost is excessive." Quill leaned forward, resting their hands on the exchange interface. "Yes," Quill said, "and when something goes wrong, we will lose a station instead of a sector." The confluence found itself recalibrating metrics it had long taken for granted. Efficiency had always been prized, but humans seemed to value robustness more. They designed systems that could fail gracefully, absorbing damage without cascading collapse. It was a philosophy born, the confluence suspected, from a history where failure was common and unforgiving. Not all reactions were positive. Several member species expressed concern that human involvement would destabilize existing power balances. The Talaric clade, whose influence rested on control of critical transit corridors, viewed the proposed relay stations as an encroachment. The Undri, whose cultural identity revolved around isolation, feared that human-built meeting grounds would erode carefully maintained boundaries. "These humans build connections," an Undri envoy hissed through layered translators. "Connections become dependencies, dependencies become leverage." The confluence could not dismiss this. It had seen similar patterns before, where infrastructure became influenced by other means. Yet there was something disarming about the human approach. They did not insist on ownership. Their proposals often included clauses that transferred control to joint oversight bodies once construction was complete. "You give away what you build," the Thren choir observed. "Not give away," Quill corrected gently. "Hand over. There is a difference. We want to know it works. We do not need to own it forever." This attitude baffled many. Ownership, control, and legacy were deeply entwined concepts for most species. Humans seemed less concerned with permanence than with impact. As weeks turned into cycles, the confluence authorized a pilot project, a single relay station at the edge of a sparsely trafficked region, jointly staffed and monitored. Construction began with human teams working alongside confluence engineers, their methods blending in unexpected ways. Humans brought tools that were simple, adaptable, and often multifunctional. They improvised solutions on the fly, adjusting plans in response to conditions rather than insisting on adherence to original designs. They also talked, constantly. Human workers narrated their actions, explained their reasoning, and asked questions even when they already knew the answers, a practice they called double-checking. This verbalization of thought processes proved invaluable to non-human collaborators, who could follow the logic even if the methods were unfamiliar. "Why do you explain what is obvious?" a Keth engineer chimed during one assembly phase. "Because it is only obvious until it is not," a human replied, tightening a coupling with practiced ease. "And because sometimes someone else sees what we miss." The station took shape faster than projected, not because of superior technology, but because of flexibility. When a structural resonance issue emerged, humans did not halt work to redesign the entire framework. They added dampening elements, tested, adjusted, and moved on, documenting everything. When the station went live, its performance exceeded expectations. Signal clarity improved across multiple bands. latency dropped. More importantly, misunderstandings decreased. Species that had previously avoided direct contact began using the relay to exchange limited information, testing the waters. The confluence took note, yet even as cooperation deepened, unease lingered. Humans were still an unknown variable, their long-term intentions unclear. They spoke of building together, but to what end? They claimed patience, but patience could be strategic. That unease crystallized when an incident occurred beyond the confluence's immediate borders. A non-aligned civilization, the Veskari Shoal, sent a distress signal. Their home system was experiencing catastrophic instability, a chain reaction in their primary star that threatened total annihilation. The signal was fragmented, desperate, and sent across channels rarely used. The confluence received it first, as it often did with such pleas. Protocol dictated assessment, then deliberation. Intervention was costly and politically fraught. The Veskari were not members. Aid could set precedents others would exploit. As the confluence began its calculations, a human transmission arrived. "We have received the Veskari signal," it said. "We are dispatching assistance." The exchange erupted. "You have no authority," the Talaric Clade protested. "This is confluence space adjacent. Any action reflects on us." "We are aware," Quill responded, appearing in the exchange with an expression that humans associated with seriousness. "We are not asking for authority, we are informing you. This could escalate," the Undri warned. "Your involvement may be interpreted as territorial expansion." Quill spread their hands, palms up, a gesture that conveyed openness. "Then we will be very clear about why we are there," Quill said. "We will stabilize the star if possible. We will evacuate if not. We will leave when the crisis is over." "You cannot guarantee success," the Keth chimed. "No," Quill agreed, "but we can guarantee effort." The confluence faced a dilemma. To forbid the humans was to assert control they might not be able to enforce without conflict. To allow them was to risk unintended consequences. In the end, they chose observation. Human vessels, smaller and more numerous than the initial arrival, diverted toward the Veskari system. They carried specialized equipment designed for stellar engineering, technology the confluence possessed but rarely deployed due to risk. Humans deployed it anyway, surrounding the unstable star with a lattice of field generators, dumping energy, siphoning mass, performing a delicate dance with forces that could tear ships apart. The operation was messy. 2 human vessels were lost, consumed by radiation and tidal forces. The humans did not retreat. They adjusted, compensated, and continued. Their communications were filled with rapid exchanges, arguments, recalculations. Against long odds, they succeeded in delaying the collapse long enough to evacuate most of the Veskari population. The star still died, but it did so after its children were gone. When the humans withdrew, battered and diminished, they transmitted a final report to the confluence. It included a list of losses, technical data, and a brief note. "We did what we could, we would do it again." The confluence absorbed this in silence. The calculus shifted. This was not opportunism. This was not conquest. This was something stranger and more dangerous. Altruism backed by capability. For the first time since humanity's arrival, the confluence felt something akin to respect tinged with apprehension. A species that would expend lives and resources for those outside any formal obligation disrupted models built on self-interest. As Quill returned to the exchange after the operation, bearing new scars and deeper lines on their face, the Threnquire voiced what many were thinking. "You risked much for those who offered you nothing," they resonated. "Why?" Quill was quiet for a moment, eyes unfocused as if replaying events. "Because we remember being alone," Quill said. "And because if we build a universe where help is conditional, we will eventually find ourselves unable to meet our own conditions." The confluence did not respond immediately. Somewhere in its vast memory, ancient decisions stirred, choices made long ago when it too had been smaller and more afraid. Humanity had not asked to join the confluence. It had begun, piece by piece, to change it. Trust, once introduced, has a habit of demanding tests. The confluence did not intend to test humanity so soon, but circumstances have their own schedules, and the universe rarely waits for diplomatic comfort. The first formal challenge emerged not from a crisis of survival, as with the Vescari shoal, but from a crisis of interpretation, which in many ways was more dangerous. At the fringe of confluence space lay a region known in translation as the fracture belt, a volume threaded with gravitational anomalies and the remnants of civilizations that had attempted to exploit them. It was a place where signals bent, time stuttered, and causality occasionally arrived out of order. The confluence maintained strict restrictions on transit through the belt, enforced by automated sentinels and layered warnings. It was not forbidden territory, but it was understood that entry required preparation and restraint. A member species, the Halloran Spiral, submitted a petition to conduct an exploratory mission into the belt, citing advances in their predictive modeling that they claimed mitigated historical risks. The petition was controversial. Some delegates argued that the belt represented an unacceptable hazard, a lesson already paid for in extinct voices. Others countered that stagnation born of fear was its own form of extinction. As deliberation dragged on, the humans sent a message. "We have been mapping the periphery of the fracture belt for some time," it said. "Our data suggests that the instability has patterns. We believe a controlled entry is possible. We are willing to participate." The reaction was immediate and divided. The Talaric clade objected on procedural grounds, noting that humans were still provisional observers, not full members. The Keth expressed technical interest, requesting access to the human data. The Undri warned that human participation would normalize reckless behavior. Marrow Quill appeared in the exchange, their posture relaxed, but their eyes alert. "We are not proposing to lead," Quill said. "We are proposing to share risk. If something goes wrong, it should not be only one species paying the price. Your presence alters the risk profile," the Thren choir resonated. "Others may take greater chances, assuming you will compensate." Quill nodded. "That is possible," Quill said. "It is also possible that our methods will encourage caution. We do not survive by assuming things will work. We survive by planning for when they do not." The confluence faced a choice that went beyond the fracture belt. Allowing human participation would signal a shift in status, an acknowledgement that humanity was no longer merely an object of study, but an actor within shared decision-making. Denying participation would preserve existing hierarchies, but risk alienating a species that had already demonstrated both capability and restraint. After extended consensus building, the confluence approved a joint mission. It would be limited in scope, heavily monitored, and subject to abort conditions agreed upon by all parties. Humans would provide navigational analysis and contingency engineering. The Halloran Spiral would lead scientific inquiry. Confluence Sentinels would remain on standby. Preparation for the mission revealed further contrasts in approach. The Halloran Spiral's vessels were elegant, optimized for efficiency and precision, their systems tuned to narrow operational tolerances. Human vessels assigned to the mission were blockier, their profiles marked by modular attachments and reinforced sections that could be detached or replaced. Where the Halloran sought to avoid stress, humans planned to absorb it. During joint simulations, these philosophies clashed. "You are allowing for unacceptable levels of deviation," a Halloran coordinator signaled, their spiral form tightening in agitation. "Your models assume failure. We assume possibility," a human navigator replied. "There is a difference. We do not expect failure, we expect surprise." The confluence observed these exchanges closely. There was tension, but also adaptation. Over time, the Halloran began incorporating human contingency layers into their own plans, while humans adjusted their margins to align with Halloran sensitivity thresholds. A hybrid approach emerged, not through compromise, but through synthesis. the mission launched under watchful eyes. As the vessels approached the fracture belt, sensor data grew erratic, streams flickering with noise that defied conventional filtering. Time markers desynchronized, forcing crews to rely on internal reference frames. The belt did not announce its dangers with spectacle. It eroded certainty. Human systems proved adept at this environment. Their software, accustomed to incomplete data, flagged anomalies without halting operations. When a Halloran vessel experienced a localized temporal shear that threatened to trap it in a recursive loop, a human ship deployed a mass anchor, a crude but effective solution that stabilized the region long enough for extraction. "You improvised," the Halloran coordinator signaled afterward, their tone a mixture of awe and disquiet. "Yes," the human captain replied. "We ran out of time to be elegant." Deeper into the belt, the mission encountered something unexpected. A structure, vast and fractured, hung suspended between gravitational currents. It was not debris in the usual sense. Its geometry suggested intentional construction, but its materials were unlike anything catalogued. Energy readings indicated minimal activity, but not absence. The discovery reignited old debates within the confluence. Ancient ruins were not uncommon, but this structure's location within the most unstable region of the belt implied a level of mastery over forces that the confluence itself approached cautiously. "Approach is ill-advised," the Undri observers warned from afar. "This is precisely the kind of temptation that ends in catastrophe." "We did not come to ignore data," the Halloran responded. "This could reshape our understanding of the belt." Human analysis ran in parallel, their systems dissecting the structure's emissions. The conclusions were tentative. "This thing is holding the region together," a human engineer reported, "not stabilizing it entirely, but dampening extremes. If it fails, the belt gets worse." The implication was sobering. The structure was not merely a relic. It was infrastructure, ancient and degraded, still performing a function long after its creators were gone. "Then we must not interfere," the Thren choir resonated. "Not necessarily," Quill interjected, joining the exchange remotely. "If it is failing, non-interference could be the most disruptive choice." The confluence hesitated. Intervention risked accelerating collapse. Inaction risked the same, deferred. The structure represented a problem with no safe solution, only trade-offs. The joint mission debated options, voices overlapping in the exchange. Human participants argued for assessment and reinforcement, proposing temporary supports that could be removed if destabilizing effects emerged. Others cautioned that any contact could trigger unknown responses. As arguments intensified, the structure itself responded. A pulse rippled outward, not energetic but informational, a pattern that resolved into signals across multiple spectra. It was not language as the confluence understood it, but it was communication, a broadcast triggered by proximity. Human systems were the first to register coherence. Their pattern recognition algorithms, honed on chaotic data, found structure where others saw noise. "It is a status report," a human analyst said slowly, "or a request, hard to tell. It is describing load, strain, decay. You interpret intent," a Keth delegate chimed. "That is dangerous." "We interpret function," the analyst replied. "Intent comes later." The confluence faced another inflection point. For the first time, humanity was not merely responding to events, but shaping interpretation. Their tools and assumptions were uncovering possibilities others had not considered. A decision was made, cautiously. The mission would attempt minimal interaction, deploying non-invasive probes to mirror the structure's output and assess its state. Humans would handle integration, their systems better suited to adaptive feedback. The operation was tense. As probes engaged, the structure's emissions intensified, patterns shifting as if acknowledging contact. Stress indicators spiked, then settled. The belts surrounding turbulence decreased marginally, a measurable effect. "It is accepting assistance," a human engineer whispered, or creeping into their voice, or it is failing in a different way, an UNDRI observer countered silently. Hours stretched into cycles as data accumulated. The conclusion, when it emerged, was unsettling. The structure was a network of distributed stabilizers, each compensating for local anomalies. Many nodes were offline, their functions redistributed to remaining elements, increasing strain. Without intervention, eventual failure was inevitable. The confluence convened in emergency session. The options were stark: withdraw and allow the belt to worsen over time, potentially threatening nearby systems, or intervene, attempting to repair or replace components of a technology they did not fully understand. Humanity offered a third option. "We can build something new," Quill said, appearing weary but resolute. "Not a replacement, not a replica, a scaffold, something that takes some of the load, buys time. It does not need to last forever." "You propose to alter a fundamental feature of this region," the Thren choir resonated. "That is not a small thing." "No," Quill agreed, "but neither is doing nothing." The confluence weighed the proposal. Allowing humans to construct infrastructure within the fracture belt would set a precedent beyond anything previously sanctioned. It would also acknowledge that humanity's approach to problem-solving had value at a cosmic scale. Opposition remained fierce. The UNDRI threatened withdrawal from joint initiatives. The Talaric Clade warned of political fallout, yet support grew among those who had seen human systems adapt under pressure. In the end, consensus fractured, but not irreparably. The confluence authorized a limited trial, under strict oversight. Humanity would construct a temporary stabilizing array, monitored continuously. Any sign of destabilization would trigger immediate dismantlement. Construction began under conditions that strained even human tolerance. Materials had to be ferried through shifting gravity wells. Assembly teams worked in overlapping time frames, coordinating across desynchronized clocks. Failures were frequent. Modules were lost, crushed, or flung into the void. Humans adapted. They adjusted designs mid-construction, rerouted resources, accepted losses without halting progress. Their communications were filled with terse updates and occasional gallows humor, a coping mechanism that puzzled their allies. At one point, a human vessel was caught in a severe distortion, its hull buckling under forces that should have torn it apart. Emergency systems engaged, sacrificing outer sections to preserve core integrity. The crew survived, shaken but alive. "Why continue?" a Keth observer asked quietly, watching the battered ship limp back into formation. "At what point does cost outweigh benefit?" A human mechanic, overhearing the translated question, answered without looking up from her work. "When the cost is paid and nothing changes," she said. "That has not happened yet." The scaffold array came online after a protracted effort. Its effect was immediate but modest. Local instability decreased, not dramatically, but enough to redistribute stress away from the ancient structure. Sensors indicated a reduction in decay rates. The belt did not become safe. It became less hostile. The confluence monitored the system for extended cycles. The feared cascade did not occur. Instead, a new equilibrium emerged, fragile but real. Reactions were swift and polarized. Some hailed the operation as a triumph of cooperative engineering. Others condemned it as reckless interference. The UNDRI followed through on their threat, withdrawing from several joint forums in protest. Humanity accepted the backlash with characteristic pragmatism. "We did not expect universal approval," Quill said in a private exchange with the Thren choir. "We expected consequences. We planned for those too. What do you seek from us now?" the choir resonated. "Validation, membership." Quill shook their head. "We seek clarity," Quill said. "You are a collection of species that learn to survive one another. We are a species that learn to survive itself. Those lessons overlap, but they are not the same. We want to know if there is space here for both." The confluence did not answer immediately. It watched the fracture belt stabilize, watched data flow through human-built scaffolds, watched member species argue, adapt, reconsider. Something fundamental had shifted. Humanity was no longer an anomaly at the edge of confluence awareness. It was a catalyst, provoking change simply by existing in proximity. And catalysts, the confluence knew from bitter experience, could either accelerate growth or trigger collapse. The measure of humanity was no longer in what they claimed they could build, but in what they were already altering by their presence. The confluence had always defined itself by balance, not peace, which implied an end state, but balance, which implied constant adjustment. Member species rose and waned in influence, technologies shifted, philosophies competed, but the confluence endured by absorbing these changes without allowing any single vector to dominate. Humanity's arrival strained that equilibrium in a way that was difficult to quantify. They were not seeking dominance, yet their actions had disproportionate effects. They were not numerous, yet their presence altered trajectories. The backlash from the fracture belt intervention did not fade with time. It hardened. The UNDRI withdrawal, initially framed as a symbolic protest, began to take material form. They restricted access to several data repositories they had previously shared, citing concerns about misuse. They recalled observers from joint projects, including the relay station that had become a quiet hub of interspecies communication. Their rhetoric sharpened, shifting from cautionary to accusatory. These humans do not merely solve problems, an UNDRI communique declared. They redefine which problems are considered acceptable to solve. The statement circulated widely, resonating with species that had long favored strict non-interference doctrines. The confluence found itself navigating a fault line not between humans and non-humans, but between philosophies that had coexisted uneasily for millennia. Marrow Quill was summoned to a closed exchange, a rare forum reserved for matters deemed existential. The space was smaller than the central exchange, its parameters tightly controlled to prevent information leakage. Delegates manifested with minimal ornamentation, signaling gravity. "You have accelerated divergence," the Thren choir resonated without preamble. "The confluence is fracturing along ideological lines." Quill did not deny it. "Yes," Quill said, "we suspected that might happen." "Then why proceed?" a Keth delegate chimed sharply. "Why push when restraint would preserve cohesion?" Quill leaned back slightly, hands resting on their knees, posture relaxed but attentive. "Because cohesion built on avoidance eventually collapses," Quill replied. "You have maintained balance by agreeing not to touch certain questions. The fracture belt was one of them. The universe did not agree to that arrangement. This is not your mandate," the Keth countered. "You are not tasked with forcing our evolution." "We are not forcing," Quill said. "We are participating. There is a difference. The distinction was not universally accepted. You intervene where others abstain," the Thren choir said. "That creates pressure. Species feel compelled to choose sides." Quill nodded. "Pressure reveals structure," Quill said. "It shows where things are strong and where they are brittle. We would prefer to discover that now, through argument, rather than later, through catastrophe." The confluence absorbed this, uneasy. Humanity spoke with the confidence of a species that had already lived through internal schisms and survived. The confluence, vast as it was, had fewer such experiences. Its conflicts were often externalized, buffered by scale. "We did not invite you to be a catalyst," the Thren choir resonated. "No," Quill agreed, "but catalysts rarely wait for invitations." The exchange ended without resolution. No sanctions were imposed. No endorsements were offered. Humanity remained provisional, suspended in a state that was increasingly untenable. Events forced the issue sooner than expected. A cascade failure rippled through a peripheral sector, triggered by the collapse of an ancient transit lattice maintained by automated systems long past their intended lifespan. The lattice had been flagged for review cycles ago, but its maintenance fell into a jurisdictional gap between three member species, none of whom prioritized the issue. Its failure severed trade routes, stranded habitats, and destabilized local economies. The confluence initiated emergency protocols, dispatching repair units, and negotiating temporary corridors. Progress was slow, hampered by conflicting claims and incompatible technologies. Human observers flagged the situation within moments. That lattice was a single point of failure, a human systems analyst reported. It should never have been allowed to persist without redundancy. It functioned adequately for centuries, a Talaric-clade representative replied defensively. Yes, the analyst said. Until it did not. Humanity offered assistance, proposing to deploy modular transit nodes similar to those used in their own expansion, creating a mesh that could reroute traffic dynamically. The proposal was technically sound but politically explosive. It would bypass existing control structures, undermining long-standing influence. The Talaric-clade objected vehemently. You are exploiting a crisis to expand your infrastructure, their envoy accused. This is precisely what we warned against. Quill responded publicly, abandoning the careful neutrality that had characterized earlier exchanges. We are exploiting a crisis to prevent collapse, Quill said. If that threatens your leverage, perhaps the leverage was the problem. The statement sent shockwaves through the confluence. It was the first time a human representative had openly challenged a member species' motives. You overstep, the Thren choir resonated, their tone edged with warning. Then stop us, Quill replied calmly, or work with us, but do not ask us to watch systems fail because someone benefits from fragility. The confluence faced a stark choice. To block human intervention would require enforcement, potentially escalating into confrontation. To allow, it would tacitly endorse a restructuring of power. Debate raged across exchanges, spilling into public forums. Member species took sides, not always along predictable lines. Those dependent on the failing lattice supported rapid action. Those who controlled alternatives resisted. As deliberations stalled, conditions worsened. Habitats reported shortages. Local conflicts flared as resources dwindled. The cost of inaction became visible. Without waiting for formal approval, human vessels began deploying nodes at the edges of the affected sector, careful to remain outside claimed territories. The nodes were self-contained, their activation contingent on external acceptance. They did not force integration, they offered it. Signals were sent to stranded habitats. We can route traffic through these nodes, the message said. No ownership transfer required, no exclusivity, use them if you wish. Many did, the effect was immediate. Trade resumed, albeit at reduced capacity. Evacuations proceeded, tensions eased. The Talaric-clade protested formally, accusing humanity of violating confluence protocols. The confluence oversight bodies scrambled to respond, issuing retroactive injunctions that lagged behind reality. In the midst of this, an incident occurred that crystallized fears. A Talaric enforcement vessel attempted to disable a human node, citing unauthorized operation. Human ships moved to interpose, forming a defensive perimeter. Weapons locked, though none fired. The standoff was brief but tense, broadcast across confluence channels in fragmented feeds. Marrow Quill appeared on an open channel, their voice steady. We will not escalate, Quill said, but we will not withdraw from providing aid that others are already using. You are daring us to act, the Talaric envoy replied. No, Quill said, we are daring you to explain why you would rather people suffer than lose control. The standoff ended when the Talaric vessel withdrew, unwilling to be the first to fire, but the damage was done. Lines had been crossed. Emergency convocation was called. For the first time in confluence history, the question was not how to integrate a new species, but whether the confluence itself could adapt to one that refused to accept inherited dysfunction. Voices clashed. They undermined sovereignty, one delegate argued. Today it is transit nodes, tomorrow it is governance. They expose our failures, another countered. That is uncomfortable, not illegitimate. They move too fast, an Undri observer hissed. They act before consensus. Consensus that never arrives is just paralysis, a Keth chimed. We have lost systems to that. Humanity did not speak for a long stretch of the debate. When Quill finally addressed the assembly, it was not to defend specific actions, but to articulate a boundary. "We are not here to rule," Quill said. "We are not here to replace you. We are here because we believe that complexity demands participation. When systems grow large enough, no single group can afford to pretend their inaction is neutral." The Thren choir resonated, quieter now. "And if the confluence decides that your mode of participation is incompatible with ours." Quill's expression tightened just slightly. "Then we will continue to build where we are welcome," Quill said, "and we will continue to offer help where it is needed. We will not sabotage you, but we will not wait for permission to prevent harm we can see coming." This was the crux. Humanity was not threatening rebellion or secession. They were declaring independence of judgment. The confluence withdrew into internal processing, a depth of deliberation that spanned cycles. Subminds ran projections, simulating futures with and without human involvement. Some showed fragmentation, others stagnation, a few unexpected resilience. One pattern emerged repeatedly. In scenarios where humanity was excluded, crises continued to be managed conservatively, losses accepted as the cost of stability. In scenarios where humanity was integrated without constraint, rapid change destabilized long-standing arrangements. Between these extremes lay a narrow band where humanity's capacity for intervention was channeled, not suppressed. The confluence reconvened. "You have forced an evolution in our structure," the Thren choir resonated. "We cannot return to what we were." Quill inclined their head. "Neither can we," Quill said. "Once we see a problem, we cannot unsee it." A new framework was proposed. Humanity would be granted conditional membership, not as a standard member species, but as a designated intervener class. They would be authorized to act in emergent crises under defined criteria, subject to post-action review rather than prior approval. Their infrastructure projects would require opt-in participation, preventing coercive adoption. The proposal was unprecedented. It codified a role that acknowledged both humanity's disruptive potential and its value. Opposition remained, but fatigue and pragmatism prevailed. The confluence voted, not unanimously, but decisively enough. Humanity was admitted. The announcement rippled across confluence space. Reactions varied from relief to outrage. Some species celebrated the prospect of faster response and adaptive systems. Others began planning contingencies, wary of what this new role might mean. Marrow Quill received the decision in a quiet exchange, alone except for translation constructs. "You are now bound by our accords," the Thren choir resonated, "as we are bound by the consequences of your actions." Quill smiled, a small, tired expression. "That is fair," Quill said. "We have always believed that if you are going to build something big, you should be willing to stand inside it when it shakes." As humanity took its place within the confluence, not at the center, but woven through its mechanisms, the measure of hands took on new meaning. It was no longer just what humans could build in isolation, but what they could hold together when the strain increased. And the strain, the universe promised, would increase. Membership changed the shape of attention. Where once human actions had been watched as anomalies, now they were tracked as variables within confluence projections. Oversight did not lessen scrutiny, it intensified it. Every intervention, every deployment of human-built infrastructure, every refusal to wait for consensus was logged, dissected, and debated. Humanity had not escaped judgment by entering the system. They had stepped fully into it. For humans, this was familiar terrain. On their vessels and habitats, there was a saying that did not translate cleanly but carried meaning nonetheless. If you are being criticized, it means you are visible. Visibility, to humans, was preferable to irrelevance. The first major test of the intervener framework came not from external disaster, but from internal contradiction. A member species known as the Pelagic Union, whose distributed bodies inhabited the atmospheres of gas giants, filed a formal grievance. They accused humanity of destabilizing a long-standing equilibrium by deploying atmospheric stabilizers near a pelagic world suffering from increasing storm violence. The stabilizers had reduced casualty rates among surface-adjacent habitats, but they had also altered high-altitude energy flows critical to pelagic reproductive cycles. "You saved some of us by harming others," the pelagic emissary pulsed, their form rippling with agitation. "You acted without sufficient understanding." The charge cut deep because it was true. Human analysts had modeled atmospheric effects extensively, but pelagic biology was poorly understood, its life cycles entwined with phenomena humans classified as hazards. What humans had seen as excess energy to be mitigated was, to the pelagic, a necessary chaos. Marrow Quill convened a response team immediately, drawing from human biologists, pelagic scholars, and confluence mediators. Unlike previous crises, there was no imminent collapse to forestall. There was only harm already done and the question of responsibility. "We will deactivate the stabilizers," Quill said in the first joint session before demands were made. The pelagic emissary recoiled in surprise. "You would undo an intervention that benefits others?" they asked. "Just like that?" "Yes," Quill replied. "Because continuing it without your consent would compound the harm. That will increase fatalities among your surface partners," the emissary pressed. "Yes," Quill said again, "and we will help them adapt in other ways, slower ways." The decision was controversial within human ranks as well. Some argued that withdrawing the stabilizers would cost lives immediately. Others countered that imposing a solution that benefited one group at the expense of another replicated the very power dynamics humanity claimed to oppose. Quill listened to every argument, then made the call. "We cannot claim to build together if we only listen after we break something," Quill said. "We made a mistake. We own it." The stabilizers were decommissioned. Human teams shifted focus to evacuation assistance, structural reinforcement, and early warning systems that respected pelagic atmospheric dynamics. Losses occurred, mourned by humans and non-humans alike. The Pelagic Union, after extended internal deliberation, withdrew their grievance. "You responded not as rulers," their emissary transmitted later, "but as participants willing to be wrong." The confluence took note. This too was a form of power, one rarely exercised. Not all conflicts resolved so cleanly. As humanity's intervener role matured, patterns emerged. Crises that had once lingered in slow decay now attracted rapid human attention. Aging infrastructure was flagged aggressively. Jurisdictional gaps were illuminated. Species that had relied on inertia to maintain advantage found that inertia increasingly worked against them. Resentment grew. Whispers circulated of a counter-coalition, informally dubbed the Preservation Bloc by confluence analysts. Its members spanned multiple philosophies but shared a common concern, that humanity's presence accelerated change beyond their capacity to adapt. "They make the universe feel smaller," one bloc delegate argued in a closed forum. "Smaller, faster, less forgiving." The bloc began coordinating votes to restrict intervener authority, proposing amendments that would reintroduce prior approval requirements under expanded definitions of non-emergent risk. The language was technical, dense with qualifiers, but the intent was clear. Slow the humans down. Humanity responded not with counter-proposals, but with data. They released longitudinal analyses showing reduced casualty rates, shorter recovery times, and increased cross-species cooperation in regions where they had intervened. They also released failure reports detailing missteps, unintended consequences, and corrective actions. "This is propaganda," a bloc representative accused. "Selective framing." "It is documentation," a human analyst replied. "You are welcome to audit it." Several did. The audits confirmed the data's integrity, though interpretations varied. The numbers were compelling, but fear was not easily quantified. The tipping point came from an unexpected direction. Deep within confluence space, far from borders and crises, an ancient member species known as the Argent Fold began to fail. The Arjun were among the earliest contributors to the confluence, their slow, deliberate cognition shaping foundational accords. Their biology was stable to the point of stagnation, their reproduction measured in centuries. For eons, they had been a constant, their presence a reassurance of continuity. Then their birth rates declined. At first, this was attributed to statistical fluctuation, then to environmental subtlety. Only after extensive study did a grim picture emerge. The Arjun genetic reservoir had narrowed beyond recovery. Their longevity, once a strength, had reduced evolutionary pressure to adapt. They were quite literally aging out of existence. The Arjun fold did not request intervention. Their representatives framed the issue as a natural conclusion. "We have persisted long enough," their emissary transmitted, voice slow and resonant. "To seek prolongation would be to deny what we are." The confluence hesitated. Extinction within its bounds was rare, but not unheard of. Intervention in a species' internal biology was considered a profound violation, one avoided even in desperation. Humanity watched, unsettled. Human geneticists identified potential pathways for diversification, technologies that could introduce controlled variation without overwriting identity. Cultural specialists proposed memory preservation initiatives, ensuring that Arjun knowledge would persist even if their bodies did not. None of it mattered without consent. Marrow Quill requested a private exchange with the Arjun emissary. "You do not owe us survival," Quill said carefully, "but you have shaped a system that now shapes us. Are you certain you wish to leave without exploring alternatives?" The Arjun emissary took a long time to respond, their internal deliberations spanning days. "We are tired," they finally said. "We have seen cycles repeat. Perhaps it is time to become memory rather than matter." Quill absorbed this, then asked a different question. "If there were a way to continue without remaining as you are," Quill said, "would that still be extinction?" The Arjun paused again. "You propose transformation," they said. "That is survival by another name." "Yes," Quill said, "it is how we have always done it." The Arjun fold debated internally, their consensus slow but deep. In the end, they agreed to a limited experiment. Human and confluence scientists would collaborate to create an Arjun offshoot, one adapted for shorter cycles, higher variability, but retaining core cognitive structures. The original fold would not be altered. The offshoot would be considered a continuation, not a replacement. The preservation block erupted in protest. "This is a line that cannot be uncrossed," they argued. "You are redefining what it means to be a species." The Arjun emissary responded themselves for the first time without intermediaries. "We define ourselves by endurance," they said. "That definition no longer serves us. We choose to redefine." The experiment succeeded. The first generation of the Arjun offshoot emerged fragile but viable, their cognition faster, their curiosity sharper. They asked questions the original fold had not asked in millennia. They sought engagement, not observation. The confluence watched an ancient voice renew itself, not unchanged, but alive. Opposition fractured. Some preservation block members doubled down, calling the act an abomination. Others fell silent, confronted with the reality of a choice made freely by those most affected. Humanity did not celebrate, they documented. In their reports, they emphasized uncertainty, the long-term risks, the possibility that the offshoot might diverge in unforeseen ways. They did not frame the outcome as victory, but as responsibility assumed. "You play with time," the Thren choir resonated privately to Quill. "With identity, with continuity." "Yes," Quill replied. "Because time plays with us, whether we consent or not." As cycles passed, the confluence began to change in ways even humanity had not predicted. Emergency frameworks expanded into proactive maintenance. Intervenor methodologies were adopted by non-human teams. Species that had once avoided entanglement began forming rapid response coalitions of their own. Humanity became less singular, their role less novel as others learned from their approach. This, paradoxically, was their goal, We do not want to be necessary forever, Quill told a gathering of newly trained Confluence engineers. If you learn to do what we do, then we have done our job. Not all learned, not all wanted to. In the quiet spaces between crises, new tensions brewed. Humanity's cultural influence spread alongside its infrastructure, subtle but pervasive. Their emphasis on adaptation, on iterative change, on confronting failure, seeped into discourse. For some, this was liberation. For others, erosion. The universe did not resolve these tensions. It rarely did. But when the next great strain came, larger than any before, the confluence would face it not as it once had, slow and cautious and divided, but as something altered by the presence of a species that refused to wait politely for systems to break. The measure of hands was no longer just in what they built or repaired, but in how they taught others to grasp uncertainty without letting go. And that lesson, once learned, could not be unlearned. The warning did not arrive as a warning. There was no singular alarm, no dramatic surge of energy or collapse of matter that could be pointed to and named as the beginning. Instead, it emerged as a discrepancy, a quiet disagreement between models that had agreed for longer than most species remembered. In deep predictive layers of the confluence, forecasts that governed stellar stability, interregional mass flow, and long-cycle cosmological drift began to diverge. At first, the divergence was within acceptable bounds: noise, rounding error, the kind of thing junior analysts flagged and senior analysts dismissed. Then it grew. The projections did not point to a single disaster, but to a pattern of failures spaced across vast distances and timescales. Stars burning marginally hotter than expected, dark matter filaments thinning where density should have increased. Regions of spacetime exhibiting subtle loss of coherence, not tearing or collapsing, but loosening, as if the universe itself were becoming less certain of its shape. The confluence convened in stages, first quietly, then urgently. This was not a crisis that could be met with ships and scaffolds. It was not localized. It was not fast. It was systemic. The constants are drifting, the Thren choir resonated, their harmonics strained by the implications. Not enough to break reality now, enough to ensure it breaks later. How much later? A Keth delegate chimed. On scales that vary, the choir replied, decades in some regions, millennia in others, but the direction is consistent. The confluence searched its vast memory, no precedent matched. Localized vacuum decay, yes. Engineered catastrophes, yes. Heat death models long theorized, but this was different. This was change without agency, erosion without a clear cause. Human analysts were already embedded in the discussion, not by privilege but by necessity. Their modeling tools, built to accommodate incomplete understanding, adapted faster than most confluence systems. They did not seek a single answer. They mapped uncertainty itself. It looks like accumulated strain, one human cosmologist said, voice subdued. Not from one event, from everything, every manipulation of mass, energy, probability. Every time we bend things instead of moving with them, we leave residue. You suggest civilization itself is the cause, an Undri observer hissed. That existence is error. No, the cosmologist replied. We suggest existence has cost, and the bill does not come due all at once. The preservation bloc seized on this immediately. This is precisely why restraint must be absolute, one of their speakers declared. Intervention accelerates collapse. Humanity's philosophy writ large. Humanity did not deny the premise. Yes, Marrow Quill said, standing once more in the exchange, older now, movements slower but eyes sharper. Intervention changes systems, so does non-intervention. The universe does not care which choice makes us feel cleaner. The confluence faced its largest question yet. If the fabric of reality was degrading under cumulative manipulation, then every advanced species was complicit. The confluence itself, with its transit networks, energy exchanges, and stabilized regions, was part of the problem. What is the solution? The Thren choir asked, though the resonance carried little hope. Humanity answered with another question. What if there isn't one? Quill said. What if there is only mitigation? What if the goal is not to stop the drift, but to make sure something remains capable of adapting when it reaches us? This was not comforting, it was pragmatic. Human proposals followed, not as commands but as frameworks. Reduce large-scale reality manipulation where possible, shift from rigid stabilization to adaptive tolerance. Accept regions of higher uncertainty as buffers rather than defects. Most controversially, decentralize survival. You propose to let parts of the universe become dangerous, a Keth delegate chimed. They already are, Quill replied. We have just been smoothing the edges. The plan that emerged was vast and unsettling. The confluence would gradually dismantle or downgrade some of its oldest, most intrusive systems, allowing natural variants to return in controlled ways. In parallel, it would invest heavily in resilience, not by preserving current forms, but by fostering diversity of adaptation. Species would be encouraged, not forced, to develop multiple modes of existence. Biological, mechanical, distributed, migratory, knowledge would be seeded redundantly across distant regions. No single failure would be allowed to erase everything. This is preparation for loss, the Thren choir resonated, on a scale we have never acknowledged. Yes, Quill said, we call it growing up. The vote was the most divided in confluence history. Entire blocks abstained. Some species formally dissociated, choosing to pursue isolation or stasis. Others committed fully, seeing in the plan a continuation of the confluence's original purpose, survival through cooperation, reinterpreted for a harsher truth. Implementation began slowly, deliberately. Transit lanes were thinned. Energy flows were rebalanced. Regions long held in artificial equilibrium were released, not abandoned, but allowed to breathe. There were losses. Some habitats could not adapt quickly enough. Migrations followed, messy and painful. Humanity bore a disproportionate share of the work, not by decree, but by inclination. They built arcs that were not ships, but methods, ways of living that could be taught and modified. They trained others not just in technology, but in decision-making under uncertainty. Marrow Quill stepped down from their role during this period, insisting that humanity not anchor itself to a single voice. We do not need heroes, Quill said in their final address. We need habits. Time passed in uneven waves. The universe did not end. It did not stabilize either. The drift continued, slower in some regions, faster in others. Predictions remained imperfect, but when failures came, they no longer propagated unchecked. When systems broke, something else was ready to take their place. The Argent offshoot flourished, branching into multiple lines, some returning to long cycles, others embracing rapid change. The Pelagic adapted new reproductive strategies that thrived in variable atmospheres. Even the Undri, after long isolation, returned cautiously, their doctrines softened by observation of what resilience looked like in practice. Humanity changed as well. They became less central, their methods absorbed and transformed by others. Their ships were no longer unique in their modularity. Their philosophy of adaptation was no longer controversial, just one approach among many. This pleased them. In a quiet corner of confluence space, long after Marrow Quill had died and been remembered in ways that varied wildly by culture, a small human-built structure drifted between stars. It was not large. It did not stabilize anything. It simply listened. Inside, an archive maintained countless records, not of triumphs, but of decisions made under pressure. Mistakes included, consequences documented. A simple inscription marked its core, translated into dozens of forms. We were here, we tried, others continued. The universe continued as well, imperfect, strained, unfinished. And somewhere within it, hands of many kinds kept building, not toward an ending, but toward whatever came next.